Alrighty, we'll get started in just a sec as soon as this computer cooperates. It's always something, you know? There we go. Okie dokie, everybody, we'll go ahead and get started. So I graded your exams yesterday. The scores are posted on Blackboard. You can see how you did. This is probably not as hilarious to anybody else as it was to me, but I was like scoring up the first person and I was like, how did they get more than 100? They got some stuff wrong. And I somehow made the exam out of 130 points instead of 100. So I just moved the points up. Everybody did C or better. So these points will help you in the long run. You just have some extra points for the semester now. And I will make sure the next exam is actually out of 100. So thank you for doing extra work. And I apologize that that had happened. But people in general did well. And I hope that it wasn't too onerous for you. I really tried to make it more fun to engage with than anything else. Just looking ahead on our schedule. So your next exam isn't for a couple different weeks. So you'll have all of fall break to work on that. And it'll be due the Wednesday when you get back, so you can even wait till you get back from fall break to work on it. So we'll have plenty of time for that as well. We were going to keep trucking along with our lectures, as I said Friday, but I know not so many people were able to be here on Friday, probably because of the weather. We will be doing a lot more interactive activities coming forward. So if y'all are able to be here, that'll just add to those points for you throughout the semester. And folks who are on Zoom, I can also make it like we did on Friday so that Zoom folks can also participate. So other sort of housekeeping thing that it sneaks up on me every year. You think I would know by now. But advising weeks start a week from today. So make sure you are touching base with your advisor. Those of you who are my advisees got an email 10-ish minutes ago from me about signing up. So you have make sure that you are doing everything you need to do. I know some people are seniors looking to graduate. Make sure you're checking all your boxes, all that good stuff. And I found out that anyone who's not a first year will register for J-term when you register for your spring courses. So that was like a little confusing because classes were starting to fill up, but no one was signing up for the upper level ones. And that's why, because you can't yet. So just again, sort of keeping things on your radar. I'm gonna put in a little plug. I'm teaching some cool classes next semester. I have clinical psych where you learn about the various different types of therapy. And because it's finally been phased out, it's not a W anymore. So you don't have to focus on writing a giant paper. So that'll make it much more accessible, I think, to people. I'm also teaching psych of gender, which in the psych major counts for that diversity box. And then the internship course, which if you're interested in, I'm having a meeting on Zoom tomorrow that I sent an email out about last week. If you're not able to attend, everything you need to know for the basics and how to apply is in the initial email. we typically have that restricted to juniors and seniors. So if you are a first year or a sophomore, just hang tight. I teach it every spring. You will always have the option to look that over, take that class. And our hope is, just like little backstory about the psych department. I've been here, I think this is my 14th year. And pretty much every year I've been here, we've asked for a 5th department member, just because there's a lot of y'all and we want to serve you well. So if we finally get that 5th department member, we might be able to start offering the internship class both fall and spring, which would open some of that up for, I know, people that like spring is more awkward or you're studying abroad. So, all righty. So I am going to try something a little different with the captions today. I am going to hide the Zoom captions and use the Google ones, because I've been trying to figure out why am I always having to move the captions around the screen. It's because last year I used the Google ones. So they'll appear under the screen. They'll never get in the way of our chatting. And the Zoom ones are still recording for my closed captions for YouTube. I finally caught up, and all the lectures up until this point are now up on YouTube. So if you go to our Blackboard page, there's a list that's just a playlist for our class. If you go there, you'll see every single class recorded. I found out that because I'm not like a super cool influencer, I can only upload so many per day. So I had to like upload some Friday and then over the weekend, but they're all up there now. Alrighty, so again, as I mentioned previously, we will sort of revisit some stuff. These are the important things about science and science literacy and scientific literacy. And so we're gonna try to like reinforce those throughout the semester. And one of these you did look at it on your exam, which is looking at the hierarchy of scientific evidence. So the strongest evidence comes from meta-analyses and systemic reviews, so systematic reviews. And these are where you take all the other published research and you bring it together. So that's why it's the strongest evidence, because it's not just looking at one study, it's looking at 20 or sometimes 200 studies and combining their results. Then you have randomized control trials. This would be new medication, new therapy. You randomly assign people to be in either the new group or treatment as usual, or for a pill, it might be a placebo. Or, for example, there are times when that's not ethical. So I was in a flu shot study last year, and they know that like the flu shot worked. So it's really unethical not to give it to people, right? So you were either randomly assigned to get the normal flu shot or the new one that they tried to make with the mRNA, the same technology they've used for the COVID shot. So sometimes RCTs look like that. It's like, we're still going to give you the best treatment in the control group, just like the experimental group will have something added to it. Cohort studies is where you kind of look over time. Case control studies, sounds like you're going to try to control as many things as you can. Then it gets harder to read up here, but it's cross-sectional studies. This is a lot of what's done. To be perfectly honest, this is a lot of what I do in psychology. This is having people fill out questionnaires, see what's going on. Then there's animal trials and in vitro studies. In other disciplines, this might be higher up, right? If you're studying animals, right? That's your whole point, right? And in psychology and in medicine, these are lower down because we're going to really want to make sure it's actually working for humans. And then on the bottom are things like case reports, which are looking at a single person or maybe a single school if you're doing school psych. And also is things like opinion papers and letters. So things that we've already covered are not scientific evidence, right? YouTube videos, personal anecdotes, gut feelings, parental instincts, some guy you know. I feel like I always hear this guy I know. All of these various websites that fall really low on that sort of normal curve we looked at of where resources fall. Now, that being said, are there places within these where you can get decent information? Sure. There's a reason I embed YouTube videos right into my lectures, because you get people like SciShow and others who are actually trying to take scientific information and make it accessible. And so just, sort of reminding y'all that that is a thing and that's okay. And so again, just to kind of break this down a little bit more, those meta-analyses and systematic reviews, you're looking at previous studies, you're synthesizing data from multiple studies. So that's why this is the highest out there. RCTs, or randomized control trials, are the most powerful experimental design. They're considered the gold standard when you're trying to especially decide, does a new medication, does a new therapy work? And in fact, there is a label you can attach to therapeutic treatments that's called evidence-based. I've heard of evidence-based practice, evidence-based treatment. And typically you could only use that label for a therapy if it's had at least, I believe it's 2 successful RCTs. It might be more than that now. So RCTs are a very important part of determining that. Cohort studies, that longitudinal or prospective studies, where you look at the same cohort or group of people over time. Case control studies, these are like, again, trying to control as much as you can. Quasi experiments. So this is like, you have an independent variable you're very interested in, but you can't ethically or feasibly randomly assign people. So like an example I often give is, if you wanted to study people who were abused as children versus people who were not, we're not going to randomly assign someone to be abused, right? That's totally unethical, not what we want to do. Ideally, we want to prevent all abuse, right? And so you would use already existing groups, and that's called a quasi-experiment because you can't randomly assign. As I mentioned, cross-sectional studies are a lot of what I do. And the animal trials and in vitro studies, the reason they're so far down is because they're very limited. It's in a very controlled situation, right? Very sterile lab environment. And so you're not going to get sort of real world application, but it is an important first step. And then case reports are just like the start of a further study, a single data point, and then you can expand from there. Alrighty, so this is going to give us an example of how there are scientific facts that get embedded in our culture and are really hard to break down. And so this might even surprise some of the folks in this room.
This video is about learning styles. What kind of learner are you?
Oh yeah, I'm a visual person, so like I can see things, yeah.
I think visual learning.
Visual.
I mean, like I remember formulas like auditory.
Like I need to be like interacting with the material.
I like to learn by doing myself.
Very hands-on.
Hands-on learner.
Hands-on.
So like if I have a model, I'd like to look at that and look it over.
Part of this video was sponsored by Google Search. There is this idea in education that everyone has their own preferred way of learning, their so-called learning style. If information is presented in accordance with the learning style, well, then they'll learn better. Now, there are dozens of different learning style theories, but the most common one identifies 4 main learning styles: visual, auditory, reading, writing, and kinesthetic, or VARK for short. Visual learners learn best from images, demonstrations, and pictures.
People may say things, but I can't really like take it in. I just got to see them act it out or write it or something.
Auditory learners learn best from listening to an explanation.
Like in school, I was always engaged in a lecture, and that was usually good enough to pass a test.
Reading, writing learners learn best from reading and writing.
Like I can get pretty much anything out of reading a textbook or something.
And kinesthetic learners learn best by doing, physically interacting with the world.
Hands-on. You have to touch things. You have to play with things. You know, it's a contact sport. You have to do it yourself.
I want to try something with you, a little experiment. I want to show you 10 pictures of things, and I don't want you to say anything while you're looking at them. And at the end of the 10, you tell me how many you can remember.
Okay.
Okay?
Okay. Okay.
Now, learning styles make intuitive sense because we know everyone is different. Some people have better spatial reasoning, others have better listening comprehension. We know some people are better readers, while others are good with their hands.
It sort of very much fits with a broad strain of thought in sort of the recent Western tradition is like, we're all unique, we're all different. And so you don't want to say like everybody learns the same way. That sort of conflicts with our feelings about what it means to be human.
So doesn't it make sense that people should learn better in their own preferred learning style? Well, teachers certainly seem to think so. A survey of nearly 400 teachers from the UK and the Netherlands found that over 90% believed that individuals learn better when they receive information in their preferred learning style.
Just like every professor has a different style of teaching, you have a different style of learning.
But when his teacher starts using visuals, Jonathan finds it easier to focus and understand the material, so he might be a visual learner.
Can you tell me what that means to you? Like, what does it mean to be a visual learner?
To me, it means that for me to learn something, sometimes I need to draw it, or I need to write it down, or I need to see a picture or a movie.
For example, science classes, I get bored easily just listening, and I think it's more interesting for me to actually be able to do it.
How do you know that you're a visual learner?
I don't. I just assume.
To take advantage of learning styles, then teachers need to do two things. First, identify the learning style of each of their students. And second, teach each student in accordance with their learning style. On the VARC website, it says, once you know about VARC, its power to explain things will be a revelation. But before you take an online learning styles quiz, it's a good idea to ask, do learning styles even exist? I mean, do you have one? And if you're taught in accordance with it, would you learn better? Well, you could test this by running a randomized control trial, where first you would identify learners with at least two different learning styles, say visual and auditory, and then randomly assign the learners to one of two educational presentations, one visual, one auditory. So for half of the students, the experience will match their learning style, and for the other half, it won't. And then you give everyone the same test. If the learning style hypothesis is correct, the results should show better performance when the presentation matches the learning style than when they're mismatched. I tried a very unscientific version of this experiment on the street. For some people, I matched their learning style, so I showed visual learners pictures of 10 items. But for other visual learners, I read out the items instead.
Bell, penguin, sun.
Okay, I'm maxed out.
How many can you remember?
Pear, knife, duck, heart, butterfly.
Apple, bicycle, guitar.
There's a spider. Did I say I already?
Trumpet, pear, butterfly,
Knife.
boat,
Heart.
heart.
I couldn't tell you the rest. That's all I got.
Most people could remember only about 5 or 6 things.
Yeah.
Six.
Yeah.
6 is not bad.
All right.
6 out of 10, which is not bad, right?
Oh, all right,
That's
yeah.
a passing score. Candle.
Everyone
forgets the candle.
But a few could remember substantially more, say 8 or 9 items.
Bug, I don't know if I said bug. Guitar, bike, eye, bell, spoon, sun, chair. I'm forgetting the last two.
That's pretty good.
8 is really good.
Oh, cool.
9? 9 out of 10. 9. Very impressive.
But the reason didn't seem to be because the presentation matched their preferred learning style, but because they employed a memory strategy.
So like as you were showing, I was like making an order in my head. So as I saw more, I would just add it to the list, and I was repeating the list as I was looking at them, so I could just say it out loud.
Did you try a strategy while you were looking at those pictures?
Yeah. So I guess I tried like creating a story because it's easier to remember a story than just individual objects. So I try to like tie it all into one story.
This is obviously anecdotal evidence, but rigorous studies like the one I outlined have been conducted. For example, one looked at visualizers versus verbalizers instead of visual versus auditory learners. The study was computer-based. So first, students' learning styles were assessed using questions like, would you rather read a paragraph or see a diagram describing an atom? The researchers also provided some challenging explanations with 2 buttons, visual help or verbal help. The visual one played a short animation, whereas the verbal help gave a written explanation. From these measures combined, the researchers categorized the students as either visualizers or verbalizers, and then the students were randomly assigned to go through a text-based or picture-based lesson on electronics. When a student hovered their mouse over keywords in the lesson, in the text-based group, a definition and clarification came up. But in the picture group, an annotated diagram was shown instead. And after the lesson, the students did a test to assess their learning. The students whose preferred learning style matched their instruction performed no better on the tests than those whose instruction was mismatched. The researchers ran the test again with 61 non-college educated adults and found exactly the same result. But learning styles are a preference. So how strongly do learners stick to their preference? Well, in a 2018 study, during the first week of semester, over 400 students at a university in Indiana completed the VARK questionnaire, and they were classified according to their learning style. Then at the end of the semester, the same students completed a study strategy questionnaire. So how did they actually study during the term? Well, an overwhelming majority of students used study strategies which were supposedly incompatible with their learning style, and the minority of students who did not perform significantly differently on the assessments in the course. The Visual Auditory Reading Writing Kinesthetic, or VARK model, came about from Neil Fleming, a school inspector in New Zealand. Describing the origins of VARK, he says, "I was puzzled when I observed excellent teachers who did not reach some learners and poor teachers who did. I decided to try to solve this puzzle. There are, of course, many reasons for what I observed, but one topic that seemed to hold some magic, some explanatory power, was preferred modes of learning, modal preferences. And thus, VARK was born. There was no study that revealed students naturally cluster into 4 distinct groups, just some magic that might explain why some teachers can reach students while others can't. But how can this be? If we accept that some people are more skilled at interpreting and remembering certain kinds of stimuli than others, like visual or auditory, then why don't we see differences in learning or recall with different presentations? Well, it's because what we actually want people to recall is not the precise nature of the images or the pitch or quality of the sound, it's the meaning behind the presentations. There are some tasks that obviously require the use of a particular modality. Learning about music, for example, should have an auditory component. Similarly, learning about geography will involve looking at maps. And some people will have greater aptitude to learn one task over another. Someone with perfect pitch, for example, will be better able to recall certain tones in music. Someone with excellent visuospatial reasoning will be better at learning the locations of countries on a map. But the claim of learning style theories is that these preferences will be consistent across learning domains. The person with perfect pitch should learn everything better auditorily. But that is clearly not the case. Most people will learn geography better with a map. Review articles of learning styles consistently conclude there is no credible evidence that learning styles exist. In a 2009 review, the researchers note the contrast between the enormous popularity of the learning styles approach within education and the lack of credible evidence for its utility is, in our opinion, striking and disturbing. If classification of students' learning styles has practical utility, it remains to be demonstrated.
What we're expecting is, if your style was honored, you're going to perform.
All right, so gets us to the gist of things. So what are people's reactions to this? Who was taught that they had a learning style? Right. Yeah, several of you. What do you think about the idea that they don't exist? Yeah.
The one test is that's the evaluation. That's like different than standard evaluation. There's so many different things you can say. People have different output. There's a practice really ready to say test it. Maybe someone's just only ready for it.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, I think another thing is unspecified whether or not the lectures and materials actually engage or not for those individuals, because I feel like that's very big distinction where I'm very engaged in the material, we focus a bit more to something hot, so I always like it. I like it for when it's better.
Yeah. definitely. Yeah, and I think that what y'all are talking about in terms of different aptitudes is a thing, right? We know that there are people, my husband is one of them, who's just good at math, right? When I was in grad school and I was learning to give the intelligence test, I used him as my guinea pig. And when we did the math section, you're supposed to like time how long it takes them to answer. And I couldn't get my thumb on and off the stopwatch fast. Like his brain just done, right? Whereas, you know, other people are much better at like applied things or socio-emotional things. Yeah, but the fact is, that you all bring up really good critical points that are really good, right? That we should look at is actually engaging, right? Are these actually relevant? Things along those lines. When they do it over and over and over, there's just no preference. And in fact, I wish they would have gotten to this in this video, but one of the things I showed is that everyone learns better when it's in multiple modalities, right? You know, if I just put my slides up and was like, right? You all probably wouldn't learn as well as when I'm also talking and the slides are up, right? And when we do activities and things like that. The really interesting thing as we think about some of the biases that we talked about the first part of the semester is it is nearly impossible to convince teachers or teachers in training of this. You can show them all the evidence, and then they will still say, no, learning styles are a thing, because that's what they were taught, right? So just like we talked about before, when you learn something, it's really hard to unlearn it. So when I was at the American Psychological Association conference this summer, I had dinner with two cognitive psychologists, and they were telling us they went to a presentation about this, where someone had been trying all these different ways to try to like teach teachers this is not a thing. And it was like immediately afterwards, the teachers would be like, oh yeah, learning styles are not a thing. But then like when they tested them or asked them questions again a week later, they were like, nope, learning styles, these are really important. So it really just shows how cognitively sticky we can get, right?
This video.
Alrighty. So the next one is interesting. This is actually like a little bit of like shame in the history of psychology. Some of the early psychologists got really involved with this. If any of you down the road take history and systems of modern psychology with Dr. Jackson, one of the things you do in that class is read letters that psychologists sent to each other. And psychologists would send letters begging the people involved with this, please stop, because you're making us look unscientific, and we're really trying hard to look scientific. So, little video on mesmerism.
Delta Airlines is committed to net zero carbon emissions by 2050.
Good for you, Delta.
Because we know a thing or two about getting where we need to be.
Just do that till the ad's done.
Beings left the ground for the first time, lifted in the air by an invisible gas discovered only a few years earlier, hydrogen. Scientific progress in the 18th century in Europe, a period known as the Age of Enlightenment, seemed like magic. Experiments in chemistry and physics were fundamentally altering how humans understood the universe. The world of medicine, on the other hand, was still largely stuck in the past. Painful, often ineffective medical procedures that had persisted for centuries, like leeching and bloodletting, were.
So for people who aren't familiar with those procedures, leeching is just what it sounds like. They showed it a couple pictures ago. They would put leeches on your skin to suck out the blood, and they thought that was somehow sucking out the impurities. Bloodletting was the same idea, but more dramatically. They would actually cut you and then catch your blood in a bowl, basically. And they would do this to people with fevers and things like that, obviously weakening them more, right?
Were still in practice until a charismatic German physician appeared in Paris in 1778. He claimed to wield magnetic healing powers and that he could cure almost any illness using just his hands. His methods caused a sensation. Even the Queen of France herself, Marie Antoinette, received his treatment. It seems like Anton Mesmer had discovered the key to how disease works in the human body. Or maybe he was making the whole thing up. Franz Anton Mesmer studied medicine at the University of Vienna, and he was fascinated by how natural energies in the universe, like gravity, interacted with the human body. He ultimately developed a theory about the fundamental nature of life he called animal magnetism. Basically, Mesmer theorized that all living things are connected by an invisible magnetic fluid.
It's a bit ambiguous whether it's an actual fluid or more like some sort of force. But essentially, it just pervades the universe. My name is Urte Lokitite, and I'm a PhD student. I'm quite interested in sort of medical history more generally.
According to Mesmer, most diseases were caused by this fluid being blocked somewhere in the body. And the cure for almost anything involved restoring the flow of this fluid by magnetizing the patient.
And again, this went off the existing theories. They thought that there were these humors in the body that were sort of spiritual in nature, and they would block something, and that would cause your symptoms. So he just sort of took it the next step and sort of made it seem scientific because he's using magnets.
Hence the medical sort of treatments that he came up with.
Initially, Mesmer had his patients swallow iron filings, which he claimed he could guide through the body using magnets.
Quite quickly, though, he discovered that just using his hands was enough and would produce the same effects.
When he approached the French Academy of Sciences and Royal Society of Medicine to seek approval for his theory, he was turned away repeatedly. So he switched tactics and appealed directly to the people of Paris. And they loved it. Mesmer's patients, many of them women, came to him with a range of ailments, both physical and psychological, like melancholia, what's now called depression.
His practice was definitely stupendously popular among the French nobility and the upper classes. He would be invited to court quite a lot, and that was another way that his popularity sort of grew at the time.
As Mesmer's reputation spread, he found ways to expand his practice.
So he not only trained disciples, but also he started having group seances.
Mesmer invented his baquet, a wooden tub that could magnetize groups of people simultaneously. It was filled with what Mesmer claimed was magnetized water, along with other materials like glass bottles and pieces of metal.
And they would have protruding rods that the patient would press against the affected body part.
Or tether the ailing body part to the baquet with rope, like this man who's suffering from a headache is doing.
Having in mind the alternatives that were on offer at the time, taking part in Mesmer's seances was just a great way to spend your time, in addition to kind of trying to heal whatever it is that your complaint is.
People crowded in a dimly lit room while someone nearby played soft music on the glass harmonica.
And then Mesmer would be wandering around in his lilac coat, touching them in various places, lower abdomen, thighs, which is where the stoppages seem to be located, especially in the women patients.
People responded to magnetization by experiencing what Mesmer called a crisis.
You'd expect crying, shouting, convulsing, hiccups, laughter. Some of the cases that are described involve people biting their hand such that a mark is left. It would be fairly extreme reactions.
One of these group seances is reimagined in the 1994 biographical film Mesmer, which stars Alan Rickman as the enchanting physician himself.
You see before you the conductors of my power. The vessel fluid is flowing.
But not everyone loved what Mesmer was doing. He had already been chased out of Vienna in 1777, after being labeled a fraud and a charlatan for falsely claiming to have cured a young girl of her blindness. And he was starting to get the wrong kind of attention in Paris too, namely within the scientific community.
The conventional sort of doctors were definitely losing a lot of their patients. You also had people actually concerned with the fact that, this magnetic fluid was probably not a thing.
One of those people was the King of France himself, Louis XVI, who in 1784 commissioned a group of leading scientists to investigate Mesmer's methods. The commission was headed up by the first U.S. ambassador to France, Benjamin Franklin, a celebrity scientist himself who had already mastered a different form of energy, electricity. Those crises Mesmer's patients experienced certainly made it seem like his methods were doing something, but the commission wanted to figure out if it was caused by magnetic fluid or something else entirely. The commission came up with one clear way to test this: strip out all the suggestive elements of Mesmer's practice, the group setting, the glass harmonica, and see if animal magnetism could cause a crisis on its own. Mesmer refused to participate, so the commission worked with his lead disciple, mesmerist Charles Deslandes, instead. Here he is attempting to magnetize Benjamin Franklin during the proceedings.
I was gonna say, like,
No
oh,
one sees
this
the
is
world
just
quite
great.
like it anyway, but the world we see below us is
When Deslandes magnetized a subject while hidden behind a partition, nothing happened at all.
Then he emerges, does exactly the same moves in front of her, she collapses.
Another test involved a woman drinking water she was told was magnetized, but wasn't.
She collapsed quite quickly within, I think, minutes in a full-fledged crisis. And then the commissioners bring her water to recover.
They told her that this was regular water.
She feels much better after drinking that. However, that cup was in fact magnetized.
Their innovative approach became the first prominent placebo-controlled blind trial. Unsurprisingly, the commission concluded that the subjects only reacted to animal magnetism when they expected it. And the true force behind Mesmer's methods was what they labeled imagination. But as it turns out, that conclusion ended up being an innovation itself.
Although the report shattered the notion that it was magnetic fluid that was doing the work, they did acknowledge that something's going on, right? Even if the reason is imagination.
Once the report was made public, Mesmer's reputation was ruined. Animal magnetism became a joke, and Mesmer was once again labeled a fraud and a charlatan. He left Paris in disgrace and died in 1815. But mesmerism lived on, finding a new fan base in the United States through the mid-1800s, until it evolved into something more recognizable today, hypnotism. James Braid, the surgeon who coined the term hypnotism in the 1840s, was fascinated by animal magnetism and wrote extensively about its potential. Like the Franklin Commission, Braid concluded that outside influence wasn't necessary to produce the phenomena of mesmerism. It could come from the mind alone. No magnets necessary. Mesmer's downfall at the hands of the Franklin Commission's report inadvertently ended up being foundational for our understanding of the placebo effect.
There are a couple of different ways you could read it. So one would be the rationalist scientific approach, or like the scientific method, has triumphed. Animal magnetism is completely destroyed as a sham, and that's the end of the story. Another way of reading it would be how powerful psychological suggestion can be.
And we can use that in important therapeutic ways. So for example, one of the disorders that we still don't truly understand, honestly, are what used to be called conversion disorders, and now we call them somatic symptom disorders. And this is where people have physical symptoms with no physical cause. So it might even be like paralysis on one side of the body, something along those lines. And I had a supervisor in graduate school who shared that, like, these people are often very suggestible. And so what he would do is he would build up rapport with them. And then one day when he was sitting with them, he would just suggest, sometimes when people are experiencing what you're experiencing, one day it'll just start to get better. And, they'll experience a tingling in their hand, and then that'll grow throughout the body. And, you might have to do that more than once, but typically within a couple days, they would tell him exactly what you told me happened, right? And they could regain use of that side of their body. So the power of suggestion can be really sort of like harnessed for good, if that makes sense. And like, lest we be chuckling too much at Mesmer, right? I would like to remind you of a few years ago how popular magnetic necklaces and bracelets were among like Major League Baseball players as something magical that helps them. Right, and unfortunately, this video has been stripped from the internet. I can never find it again, but it was so fantastic. Penn and Teller, the magicians, for a while had a show called Bullshit, and they looked at the placebo effect, and they looked specifically at magnetism, and they gave people like oven mitts with magnets in them, but they demagnetized them first, so very similar to what Benjamin Franklin did. And people would be like, oh, I could really feel the magnets working. So we are still less susceptible today to all sorts of snake oil, including the components of mesmerism. And part of what makes us susceptible is our culture. And so culture is the shared way of life with a group of people. And it includes things like behavior, values, and beliefs that are passed on from generation to generation. Now, interesting sidebar, humans are not actually the only animals that can have culture. This is something we've been discovering more recently. So for example, orcas, which are also known as killer whales, and I feel like they're not whales, but they're dolphins, and dolphins are technically the same group as whales, so it's fine. Those orcas that were attacking the yachts, right? Like, they were teaching each other that there are different groups of orcas around the world who hunt in completely different ways. Some will purposely beach themselves to get seal pups. Some will create like bubble nets. They do things very differently. There was a group of orcas, I want to say the late 80s. It's been a while, but they all started wearing dead salmon, like hats on their heads. It was like a fashion trend. So, you know, then that stopped. It was too late season. But the idea that we are the sole arbiters of culture is now being called into question, which I kind of love. But culture is really important to people. Historically, when we study people, skeletons, artifacts, what we're trying to do is piece together their culture, right? Why were people buried with these certain things? Why did the Egyptians preserve most of the internal organs, but just pull the brain out through the nose and throw it away, right? Things along those lines. So I have a much shorter video about culture.
What does it mean when people talk about cultures and traditions? What is a culture? A culture is a pattern of behavior of a group of people. These can include what kind of food they eat, the language they speak, the sports they enjoy and play, their music, their beliefs, and many other things. Every culture has their own traditions. But what is a tradition anyway? Traditions are the beliefs, routines, and ways of celebrating in families or cultures. Traditions can include what kinds of meals you eat when you celebrate holidays. They can include what kinds of gifts are given. A tradition can be a special prayer you say before bedtime. It can be how you celebrate Thanksgiving or Halloween, or a special treat your grandma likes to make for you. Many families have a special tradition for decorating their Christmas trees or for their first days of school. What traditions do you have in your family?
Right, so thinking about culture being embodied by traditions and other things like music, like the ways of interacting with each other. So let's brainstorm about this for a minute and think about this. So what are examples of culture for the United States as a whole? When you think about the US, if you had to describe its culture, what would you bring in? Yeah. What's that? One more time first. Oh, baseball. Yeah, American is apple pie and baseball, right? My husband made an apple pie yesterday. Very American, right? Yeah, what other things make you think of the US in terms of culture? Yeah. Yeah, and that's one of the things we talk about is whether the US as a melting pot. People really love that term, that we've just squished all the cultures together. One of my history teachers in high school described it more as like a tossed salad, where we've got people with different cultures next to each other. And I'm sure some of those things become fused, but yeah, they coexist, right? We could be pretty blunt and honest and acknowledge that we are a culture that is centered in colonization, right? And that we have, in particular, abused and exploited people of color, but other people of minority status, including people who they used to call feeble-minded, people with mental disorders, right? But yeah, we could also think about things like sports culture, like music culture. We have a very rich culture in terms of country music and hip hop, right? Various things along those lines. All right, how about if we just focus on the South in the US or even the Southeast, since that's where we are? What sort of things do you think of when you think of the culture in the South? Right, it looks like you have something. Oh, yeah, yeah, food, right? Yeah, this is a huge thing that people think that people from up north are like always in a hurry, rude, things along those lines, right? It depends on which part of up north you're talking about. I don't know if anybody else has stumbled upon the Holderness family on YouTube. They have some really funny videos about the South versus the Midwest and how like the cultures actually overlap in really interesting ways. Like, no, after you, right? That's like a politeness form. What are the things we think of when we think of the South? Yeah, country music. Yeah, definitely. Country music. If we go further to Appalachia, we're talking like bluegrass, right? Yes. And you know, I think here, and we're gonna get to Hampton Roads next. It's not quite the same vibe as the Deep South. So I did my internship in Augusta, Georgia. I'm from Michigan, have spent time in Indiana and Ohio growing up. And people would literally tell me like, slow down, honey, it'll be there when you get there. Right? It was just like a totally different experience for me. Yeah, just a different pace of things, not feeling like you need to rush things. Or when you think of our area, whatever you want to call it, Tidewater, Hampton Roads, coastal Virginia, right? What do we think of our culture here? The military, right? We have all 5 branches. Some people argue that Coast Guard is no longer a branch because they put it under Homeland Security. I still sort of classify it that way, right? But yeah, we have Air Force Base, naval bases, we have Army base, and then there are Marines around. So for example, my husband works at the shipyard over in Portsmouth, and whenever they're working on like a sub or a carrier, there are Marines with their big weapons to protect that sub or carrier. Other things we think about when we think about this area. Yeah, the beach, right? And having that culture. And we're speaking like little subcultures depending on which beach you go to, right? Like Schick's Beach has a very different vibe than the ocean front. The other thing I think a lot of people don't realize as much is that we have a big Filipino culture here. We have quite a few folks from the Philippines who come over. And so there's like a Philippine cultural center, there are Filipino restaurants, and that's not something you typically run into other places. Here's a fun fact that I discovered after I moved here. So when you go to Mexican restaurants here, right, you get your salsa, and then you also get this white stuff, right? And I had never seen that anywhere else I'd been, and that's because it was like invented here. It's basically like Mexicanized ranch dressing. And there's like an argument between all the different Mexican restaurants of who actually started it first. But it's specific to our area. Yeah, I think just being aware of, you know, even conservative folks who might not want to use the word climate change are much more aware of environmental impact here, right? If you drove around, you know, Friday, Saturday, you see flooding everywhere, right? And so we are very aware. I mean, my church used to be in downtown Norfolk near the Chrysler Museum, and we would have to check the tide charts every time we went because you could actually get trapped in their parking lot if it was high tide, right? And so, yeah, you need to be very aware of the environment and what's going on around you. And You know, again, even as a transplant from the Midwest, the first time we had a hurricane when I was here, which was actually like the first couple days of school, my first year teaching, we like had hurricane days, classes canceled, I was like, clear on my life. But then realizing that like they're not quite as scary as they seem initially, right? It's probably just gonna get a lot of rain. All right, how about BWU? What's our culture like here? What are some cultural traditions we have here? That's true, yeah. Change of presidents led to change of things, yeah. President Greer, who just passed away, unfortunately, he was very much like a good old Southern boy. And so like when they did the pig roast, he would be the one roasting. Like he would be there. He had a grill on the balcony of his presidential office and would grill for people. Right. And Miller is a little more, trying to think of how to say this tactfully, corporate, perhaps. Right? So there's a different vibe. Yeah, and that's changed some of the traditions. But what are some of the traditions that like have stayed or that you all enjoy? Oh no, I haven't stripped them all, have they? Oh, late night breakfast, yeah, huge one, yeah, and that's, I think my college did that too, it's a big thing during exam week. I think of homecoming, because my daughter, until this past summer, when she came to campus, not on a homecoming or alumni weekend, thought that we just always had bounce houses on our campus, because that's what she comes, right? And it's great to see the alums and all the sports teams playing. We also have a culture of giving, right? So Wesleyan Engaged being a big part of things, Strike Out Cancer, right, with the softball team, other teams being involved with other charities. Yeah. Us have a very involved with the community. It's so true, yeah, and we integrated that even more, right? Like Girls on the Run having their office essentially right across the hall. That's something new that Miller brought in that we actually kind of like, right? It's nice to have those and have people being able to volunteer pretty easily and like the Girls on the Run race being on our campus, right? What about academics? When you think about academics at Wesleyan, what do you think of? During finals. Yeah, I love that they do that for y'all, that they bring in the therapy dogs and they do massages. I love that so much. Yeah, they changed it again. So yeah, in fall, it's gonna be like smaller sessions kind of broken up, but in spring, we'll still have the big day of therapy. I don't know if they were having a harder time getting stuff for fall or what it was, but yeah, work day is something that when they first started, we were all like a little skeptical because we were always like really protective of our class time, but I ended up loving, right? I think, yeah, it's a really cool way to see all the neat stuff y'all are doing. Yeah, when I think of academics on Wesleyan's campus, I feel like we're getting known more for like Earth and Environmental Science with Greer, right? And like the Baton Rouge Honors College. I think we're certainly known for business with our MBA, and our business department typically has the most majors, like by double of whoever's in second place, right? So I think that that's a big part of our vibe. We're kind of a non-traditional liberal arts institution in that we do have more of the professional majors, like rec and leisure, like business, things along those lines. And so that gives us sort of an interesting vibe as well. I think like we were mentioning with just Hampton Roads, our location also gives us a different vibe. So I told you all before, I went to school in the middle of Ohio, right? Like we didn't have that many options for things to do on campus. So like our campus was much more about on-campus activities. And here I get the impression it's a vibe, it's a mix, right? That like you might go to a party on campus in one of the townhouses, but you might also like go down to Peabody's or something, right? So yeah, even just location, right? And we know that traditionally, historically, location has changed what people do. So for example, one of the theories about individualism versus collectivism is that the reason European countries like Germany started this very individualistic society is because they were like hunting deer and things like that. Whereas other areas that needed more of like an agrarian society, like in China, they had to work together in a much more concerted way. So keep thinking about culture. We're going to talk about the cultural milieu starting on Wednesday. And thanks to everybody who was able to sign on. Have a good day.